All right, hello and welcome to Movoto Mike, a new real estate podcast brought to you by Movoto.com. My name is Patrick Kearns. I'm an ex-journalist and 10-year vet of the real estate industry who's currently working as Movoto's head of communications. Here with me today is my associate, Sophie Brandeis. Sophie, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great, Patrick. I'm excited to be here, and I'm feeling great about our first podcast and our first guest.
Yeah, so this is our inaugural show, the pilot episode, if you will. We are very excited to have a pretty esteemed member of the real estate industry. Sophie, why don't you tee up our first guest for our first podcast here?
All right, so today joining us on the Movoto mic for the very first time, we have Brad Inman. Brad is a renowned journalist, author, and entrepreneur who has had a remarkable career trajectory. He is best known for founding several media companies, including Inman News, the leading independent news publisher for the residential real estate industry. As the founder of Inman, Brad played a pivotal role in shaping the landscape of residential sales, media, and conferences. Brad is a thought leader, a trailblazer, and his dedication to providing top-notch information and fostering innovation has earned him numerous awards and accolades throughout his career. After decades of founding and scaling tech and media companies, Brad has set his sights on a new venture, Longevity Media.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Patrick.
You and I worked together for a long time. I credit a lot of my real estate knowledge for my time at Inman. I learned quite a bit. I like to joke now at these conferences and stuff. I was a bit of a hater. Now maybe I'm a bit of a lover. I think that maybe the infectious energy that you bring to the industry has caught on finally to me and the conferences that you put on and sort of the empire you built. But I want to sort of take it way back, right? You had a career as a journalist. Why real estate? What was the interest in real estate? Why was that the beat you focused on? Why sort of build a career covering real estate and this focus on the real estate industry?
Yeah, I kind of backed into it, Patrick. I was someone that cared a lot about housing and housing affordability. Early in my career, I was an activist, and I fought the battle against redlining back when it was, it's a real problem today, even I think, but back then it was a serious problem, and that led to me commenting and writing things. And the San Francisco Examiner saw some of my writing, and they reached out to me and said, would I like to contribute a column? And so I started writing about affordable housing. I wrote about second units in your backyard. I wrote about Section 8. I wrote about NIMBYs. And then that led to a career in print journalism, where I wrote for all kinds of newspapers, primarily in the West Coast. And then my beat in the 80s became very much around the conflict and clash between developers and environmentalists. I was one who said, hey, we have to increase the supply of housing, which wasn't very popular in California amongst certain constituencies, but didn't put me in bed with developers because I've never compromised the integrity of what I call kind of classic journalism ethics. But in covering that, I found myself in the midst of controversy, which I've always done as a writer and an advocate. And so I kind of backed into it and then built a whole career around it. It's
funny that the more things are different, the more they stay the same, right? It feels like San Francisco, that's still a very, very relevant, the sort of NIMBY-ish.
Yeah, it's the same issue today, Patrick, as it was back then. I think the last newspaper column I wrote was 20 years after the first one, and I think it more or less followed the same lines. I was credited with using the word NIMBY the first time in print. I really railed against this kind of inequity. The money-classed homeowners who waved the banner of environmentalists but were denying affordable housing. I mean, this is now a global debate. I read a lot. I live in Europe most half the time, and it's the same debate there. It's NIMBYs around the world. There's like two classes in the world. There's not in my backyard, and there's the immigrants and everybody else. And if you just reduced everything to that, maybe add in religion, a few other things, and you can pretty much explain a lot of inequity and conflicts in the world. So I always loved that debate. I always loved, and then I accidentally got into the industry B2B world again by accident. I went to my editor in 1995 and said, hey, there's a scandal at the National Association of Realtors.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. And they had wasted $29 million. And then the NAR was, had a big secret veil around it. It didn't tell its members anything. And my editor said, no one cares, Brad. No one cares about the National Association of Realtors. We don't even know what it is. So no, I don't want that article. So at the same time, there was a guy from KQED, which is a public radio station in San Francisco. And he said, Brad, put it on the internet. I said, how do I do that? So he showed me how to do it, and probably one of the first blogs. And I wrote it. And what was interesting, I was thinking of maybe there was a public audience. It wasn't. It was realtors who felt disenfranchised by their trade group way back then. And interesting too, primarily RE/MAX, because they were more professional, because they actually had to pay $1,000 a month, so they had enough money to pay a grant. So they tend to be higher, more sophisticated. And interesting, the other group was the buyer agents. Buyer agencies were nerdy. They were more kind of self-righteous. They were, they felt strongly. I mean, everything that's been brought up in the last few years over the litigation. Those buyer agents, they were into tech. They're on the internet. And so suddenly I had an audience, and I suddenly had a business. And so that's how I got into this. Before that, I was always a consumer writer, and I didn't, in fact, I just ran, interestingly, something about these private realtor networks that are being formed, that are alternative to the MLS. And I pulled up an old picture that I had commissioned with the Examiner, because I launched consumer shows back then. Because what was happening, like stockbrokers, when the guy riding the limo to work is getting advice from the guy taking the train, suddenly independent information, like look at the birth of Bloomberg. And so I was part of that movement, the birth of independent real estate information that wasn't compromised, that wasn't advertorial, and the public was hungry for it. So we did an event, a consumer event, early on in my career with the Examiner called the Home Buyers Fair. And they were my partner. And we were expecting 300 or 400 people, and we had 5,000 people lined up around the block. And that ad you see there of the sleazy looking guy opening his trench coat with houses was the ad the Examiner used, which pissed off the real estate industry. It was the beginning of me pissing off the real estate industry. And but the public came in droves, and guess who followed? As soon as the public was there, the industry wanted to be next to the public. So that was a thriving business I did all over the country, the Miami Herald, the San Diego Union Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Examiner, and wound up selling that company a long time ago.
Wow. I feel like it's a rite of passage to write about a NAR scandal. I think the first story I wrote for Inman was when NAR rolled out a new logo that was very expensive and very not well received. And I was like, oh, this is a fiery audience. These people feel very strongly about things. So I love that.
Yeah, no, they do.
So Brad, you just spoke about why real estate. Can we pivot a little bit and talk about Inman and where it started, where it is now, and sort of how you grew this multi-channeled brand and how you built it?
Yeah, sure. And I should say the other thing that hit me, I love the real estate beat. And I covered a lot of things. I covered business. I covered public policy. Mine was always kind of the nerdy, intellectual stuff. But I always went back to real estate because I realized that, okay, what do we do in life? We work, we play, and we're at home. And home has this central role in our lives like no other thing, like more than going to restaurants or, working out or anything. It's like, it's where our families are raised. So I love the real estate beat. So on top of accidentally finding myself in this space, I also love the beat. And I still to this day love it. I've done a lot of things, and, away from real estate, but I can always easily come back to it. So Inman News was a customer at a time, probably like your podcast here. You get a listener, you get 2 listeners, you get 5 listeners. I don't know how many of those people when we launched were reading us, but soon after I realized, I do have a business here. I now have readers, and we have what's called distribution. And I think your listeners know this, but in the media business, there's content and there's distribution. You don't start a media company. I've been involved in a lot of great ones, a lot of niche media, Curbed and Eater and Racked and, ebooks and all these crazy businesses, all disruptive. And you got to have those 2 things. So suddenly I had an audience, and then the scandal in NAR just kept, it it was a gift from God. It kept going and going. And here's an interesting tidbit I don't think I've shared too often. There was a high level person at the National Association of Realtors who was reading me like everyone else at NAR, and NAR was out to get me. In fact, there was a executive at the old Realtor.com, a couple of them went to prison, and on his desk it said, "Kill Inman."
Wow.
He had a little plaque. And I wore that with a badge of honor. I mean,
that's journalist goals right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So they weren't kind to me, but there was this one high level guy, and he was until this day, he was an anonymous background source who gave me all the inside dealings at NAR. And so we were constantly ahead of them. And so that helped build that audience. And then right away, I needed a better business model. I was syndicating content to websites. That was the beginning of a business. An idea that Craig Newmark at Craigslist gave me that idea. But I did that, and then I realized, we could do an event. I always loved events because I had done the consumer events with newspapers. And so we had an audience. So we took 50 people to the woods of Sonoma, and that a cold winter weekend, talked about disruption, disintermediation. We talked about virtual walkthroughs. This is all in 1996. And when those 50 people were walking to their cars after that crazy week in the woods in Sonoma, a friend of mine who was there said, "Brad, I think there's 1,000 people like this that are into tech and innovation, and I think you could charge them $1,000 a person." Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so give me an idea like that. And we did an event in 6 months, and I think we had 700 people, and I think they paid us like $700. And so that's how the event business, and I only bring up the event business to the evolution of the company. If you're going to get into the media business, you got to have a business model, and events were always something I understood. And the beauty of events is you get all the funds up front. You get the registrations, the sponsors. You don't let them exhibit unless they paid you. And you pay all your bills afterwards. So this is a bootstrap business, starting with my personal credit card. But I instantly had a business model, and instantly profitable. And that's really hard to do. And I think Inman has been profitable every year since that launch. And, that's a rare thing to be able to say you've done. And because I've raised a lot of venture money where you don't have to be profitable, and you're winging it, and you're trying to keep your burn rate down, and you're running out of money. And I've been through that cycle. But this was a company that actually was profitable. So those are the roots. Now, what else? Unbelievable writers and editors. Unbelievable business side people like the CEO now of Inman, Emily. I didn't run Inman for 15 years. People thought I did, but I didn't. I was the owner. All these wonderful, great people. A friend of mine said the other day, they all went to Inman University, one form or another. And, I just worked with really talented, fantastic people who each and every one, some failed, but, had to fire a few. But they took us to the next level. And now it's kind of amazing what's going on there. It's a beautiful franchise. I'm so proud of.
It's interesting because obviously I had my own experiences working there, and I feel that I went to Inman University, right? I feel like I learned so much working there, right? I came up as a journalist during this digital media boom when I was in school. When I was learning to be a writer, I was looking up to the Gawkers of the world and Deadspin and Gothamist in New York City. And then I got to work with all of those people at a real estate trade publication, which would have surprised me a decade later, right? But it really was that a real estate trade publication was borrowing from some of the brightest minds in media. There's so much talent on the market now. So if you're building a media company, is that the approach you have to take? Do you have to look at all of the talent? Because we're seeing 100 of the other places I've written for, Vice, Gawker was sold. They're all plummeting now. I mean, is it because they didn't utilize that talent in the best way? Are they spending money on stupid things? Are they not, as Sophie said, building a multi-channel brand enough? What is the failings here? Is it just that this boom time of digital media is over?
Well, I think you just nailed it. And the two specific people are Lockhart Steele and Joss Albertson, who I was fortunate enough, when Inman was in its formative days, I saw, and I think we were one of the first blogs, but there was kind of Web 2.0, they called it, the first generation of bloggers. And so I was, is this a threat to Inman? So I ran around and met all of them. I bought many of them out to try to make sure we weren't missing the boat. And I went to the Lower East Side to meet with Lockhart Steele, who then was editing a country real estate magazine or house magazine, and he was doing this blog, and he took me around. Instantly liked him. And so I said, I want to buy you. And he goes, oh, that's really, he goes, you can invest in me. So I invested and became chairman and was part of that whole movement of those characters. And then, you know, the twain, it always meets again, I find, in life. That's why I always tell young people, always think the long term, don't burn a bridge, because so I persuaded them to come, and they took Inman to another level. And what was different about them and some of these other buzzy ones that everyone thought was, you know, the cat's meow? Well, it was pretty simple. These guys were singularly focused on really quality content. They didn't get struck by Hollywood. They didn't marry movie stars. They're just media guys through and through, and they really focused. I mean, Josh and Locke are, in fact, they have a new venture now in kind of the younger luxury area called Found New York and Found LA, and I think we're going to go to London and Paris and a whole bunch of places. And I couldn't wait to write a check to invest in them because, you know, I think until I die, the last investment I'll make will be with Locke and Josh, or they with me. And now they're helping me on the side with my new stuff. So it's really, so how is that? Don't get stars in your eyes or your head will blow up, my dad used to say. And I think sometimes in media, like, you know, whenever these guys like, I remember I worked with Microsoft. I sold them a database it was a tiny fortune for me. It was like, oh my God. But I watched these nerds from, you know, Seattle get starstruck by Hollywood. And whenever that happens, people, you know, they get stars in their eyes and their heads blow up. So these people are real media people. They're not about all of that. You know, it's not about celebrities.
They're grounded, the real deal.
Yeah, to me, they're the real celebrities. You know, they're the backbone of everything that's credible about media that we don't talk about enough. All we hear is all the bad stuff, and there is a lot of bad stuff. But there's so many good journalists and good editors with traditional publications and new publications. And if they can just stick to some basic principles, you know, that we all, I think, understand, and try to cover all sides and try not to have an opinion, and, you know, correct your mistakes and build your sources and, you know, all of that.
Speaking of great journalists, when I started working at Movoto.com a few months ago, I started my career reading Inman articles just so I can educate myself. It's true. So educate myself and to really have a good, solid understanding of the industry I'm working in. And I had the privilege a few weeks ago to attend your conference in New York City. So I think the change from the 50-person week in the woods to the 1,000-person conference in New York City is remarkable. My question to you is, how have you noticed a change in the real estate industry as Inman has grown and changed over the years?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things that took us to the. We were always different. We were completely out there, deliberately trying to set us apart from the traditional real estate conferences. So let's just take the stage. When I got into this and I said, oh, wow, we can disrupt this thing. 5 white guys, 60 plus, with ties and shirts and a podium. Basically, the moderator, you know, giving the speakers, I could use a crude comment, but it was all about the speakers. It was all about their egos. There was no controversy. There was no truth telling. It was just, you know, a manufactured kind of here's who runs the industry. And we started right away doing it completely differently, from production values and how we presented the information. And really, I think, started building a community. But one of the decisive moments in this kind of new phase of Inman was around 2008, 2009, with the Great Recession, when a lot of and by the way, the old generation hated Inman. They boycotted us. There was a big national franchise that put something where you couldn't receive email from Inman, so that the realtors couldn't read it. I have been boycotted, trashed, investigated, you know, and they didn't like us at all. So we kept really appealing to the innovator. But what happened, a new generation of young brokers emerged after the Great Recession. You know, people like Thad Wong and Mauricio, I mean, a whole generation. And when they woke up and got into the industry, they looked around and they went, NAR, that's not, and they looked here at Inman and went, oh, this is colorful and innovative. And so that, suddenly we started skewing very young. We always had the entrepreneurs, but now we had these young, up and coming, emerging brokers. You had, you know, from Zillow to Redfin to Compass, and we became their home and their community, I think, instead of NAR, and that changed the complexion. But then I'd also give credit to my wife, Yas. She's a French Moroccan and quite eccentric person, and she was by my side the last 12 years when we took it another level. And she said, "Look at your audience, Brad. It's 2/3 women. Look at your audience. It's 20% gay. You got to get these people on the stage and reverse it." And we always had men and women, but and there was also others. Morgan Brown, he was pushing for women. Laura Monroe was pushing. And so we made a whole scale effort 15, 16 years ago to diversify the audience, and then we brought on this woman, Katie at Inman, and she went out and found these people in the community. Instead of going to the classic big shots, finding really new voices, new innovative ideas, and started putting them on stage. And what that did is it changed the complexion of Inman. And it was no ideological thing. It was just like, it's very pragmatic business. It was the best thing we ever did, because then Inman was able to forge the gap generationally, which is always hard, between new ideas and new ways of thinking about everything in media. And we reflected them. And my view of media, if you don't reflect the community, and if you're not inspired by what the community wants and cares about, you're probably going to do shitty journalism. It's back to the classic idea, know your reader, and write to your reader. Don't write to your ego. Don't write to your parents. Don't write to your career. Don't write to how you look on LinkedIn. Get over that. Write to your reader and respect your reader. And as I jokingly say, I used to teach at Cal Berkeley, often on a journalism school in the B school. And if I have a chance to go out to dinner with faculty at Cal Berkeley or 7 realtors, it is a no-brainer. I'd rather go out with 7 realtors because they're a lot more fun, they're a lot more interesting, they're a lot more colorful. And that's, I think, another part of Element and our value, an element of Inman and our values. We're not about better than thou, we're not arrogant, and we're not elitist, and we like to identify with our reader and our community. And that would be a lesson for anyone starting a media company. Get over yourself, get over talking above them. And someone said the other day, "Are you dumbing down the longevity enterprise?" And I go, yeah, if that's what it takes for the public to understand your ridiculous medical speak that is confusing the public, yeah, absolutely, we'll dumb it down. If you don't like it, get off the stage.
Something you touched on a little bit, and I think it was maybe unique to my experiences with the real estate industry, is like there's not a strong sense of gatekeeping, right? People are really generous with their time and really generous with their knowledge. I think about the people that I work with, even then when I was a journalist, the people that I work with now, like Chris Heller, for example, always had the time for me, always said, "I can explain this thing to you in 20 minutes. I can, and I see it a lot on stage." Has that been your experience with folks in the real estate industry? Like when I covered hockey, for example, people did not want to let you in, right? They would talk over your head. They'd speak in platitudes. They would not get into the tactics of things. They would not be generous with their knowledge. But real estate has always felt really different, no matter what somebody's role is or somebody's title, right? The CEO, Robert Refkin of Compass, would spend the time to explain to me, this is what the thing we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. And this is why we think it's going to work. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with one caveat, though, but I agree with you, Patrick. And it's because it's a pretty distributed leadership base. There's millions of realtors. It's kind of unusual, right? I guess there's millions of Uber drivers too, but here it's quite different, I think. And so they understand marketing and promotion, so they'll take the time to talk to you because they see the value of that, and they want to be in the press to speak to or to expand their own networks. I would say the traditional CEO, and Robert's definitely an exception. These posses and PR teams that are between you and them and the corporate speak. But other than that, yeah, they're very accessible, very helpful. They're also, which I love, I've been at the wrong end of it, wrong being, they speak their opinion and they're very passionate and they really care about their industry. As I always say, these people don't have a job when they wake up this morning. You and I do. But they don't have someone giving them a regular paycheck twice a month. They don't have health insurance. So they're very passionate about their work, and they're very passionate about any threats to their industry. And, we can rev them up and they can get very angry very quickly at us. And I think that's always good for us. It's good for our feedback. We don't always bow to their mass sentiment, but we certainly listen to it very carefully. So it's accessible, it's opinionated, And I think it's a really marvelous industry in that way.
So having spent so many years in and around this industry, what advice can you give to aspiring entrepreneurs and people entering the real estate industry, whether that's an agent, a prop tech entrepreneur, someone starting a real estate media company, just general advice?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, welcome. It's the barriers to entry are very low. Like the barriers to entry journalism are very low. You can start a newsletter in Beehive tomorrow and, have maybe one or two readers, at least your mother and your grandmother. And similar to real estate, you don't need a license to be a journalist, unlike a doctor, a dentist, a massage therapist, all the rest. I mean, you need a license, but you don't need much to enter the industry. So that's the good news. The challenge is that there's a lot of competition. And so well, I'll just tell you what I did in my life. I outworked everybody. I got up earlier, started earlier, and I love my work. So it wasn't like I worked later than everybody and did that my whole life. And I have never read a self-help book in my life. I don't intend to. People always ask me, do you recommend some self-help? I go, I have never read one. I probably should have, but I didn't, because I think they're all bullshit. I think most of those are written by people that never started anything. And so why would I read about what they have to say? I like other books, nonfiction about successful people and things, but I just outwork everybody, and that's what good realtors tend to do, and other people, tech startups. The other is just surround yourself. It's the same old advice by, really good, competent, capable people. Every time I compromised on that, I didn't do well. We were talking about Josh and Locke. Those are examples, but there's so many good companies out there, and they all have that ingredient. That's key. If you're an independent realtor, have a community where you can go to and turn to, and you can get advice. The role of mentors, it kind of falls in that self-help bucket I don't really like, but I do know now, looking back, we didn't call them mentors, we didn't formalize it, we didn't have a Q&A for the mentors, we didn't have a list to pick from, but I had 5 really unbelievable mentors in my life, and I picked up more later, who influenced from an editor that taught me how to structure a story and put the lead on the top and the nut graph third and make it spicy and interesting and cut everything in half, the whole verbal economics, to a business development guy who was kind of sleazy and not well regarded, but taught me a lot about business, to someone that told me how to present to a room full of publishers when I did an ebook company. And when someone would ask that hard question, I would go after them, instead of listening. And I was next to this really great guy. He was named Jared. He's co-founder after he worked for me of Hotel Tonight, Jared Simon. And he would always say when that person would come in that big room and ask that really tough question that I'd get defensive and even aggressive, he would say, "That's a great question." And then he'd reach over and pinch my leg so hard so that I didn't interject and participate in the conversation. Those are the little things I learned. But I had so many mentors, people that worked for me and people that I worked for, and then colleagues, and that helps. Now, when people say, I'm going to go find one, I'm going to call Sherry Chris, which would be a good one. But I think you look around and you probably have someone that's your mentor and you don't even know it. They're right there in front of you and you just don't appreciate it. It's like I always said in all the business I had, sometime you're lucky in life where you get a swirl, and that swirl is, the whole ecosystem is aligned, the stars are aligned, and in your middle of it, you don't even appreciate it. And I always tell my team, the younger ones particularly, I said, this is one of those moments. Enjoy this because it may never happen again the rest of your life.
I love that. One of my pieces of advice for Sophie, you just mentioned Sherry Chris, was find Sherry Chris and introduce yourself to her at Inman. That was like one of who should I meet? What should I do? Find Sherry Chris, introduce yourself to Sherry Chris. Like one of those people that's just wonderful with their knowledge and their time and exceptionally kind.
Yeah, and she's one of those that gives more than you take, which, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't like that, but Sherry's one of those. Yeah.
How about we end with some rapid fire questions? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the only rules here are that you can't think, you just have to answer.
Okay.
Okay, Patrick, do you want to start us off?
Sure. What's your favorite story you've ever published, and was it by me?
Next.
Okay. You could interview any famous real estate figure, dead or alive, on stage at the next Inman conference. Who are you interviewing?
Definitely Gary Keller.
I love it. Well, will it happen is the question.
I don't know. We invite him every time. We had one epic interview that goes down in history.
That was my first Inman conference was that a Gary Keller interview. So legendary.
Yeah, and it really was powerful because people were split 50-50. Some thought I was evil and others thought Gary was evil. So it tells you about kind of like everything in society. But yeah, that was epic. And the guy's just kind of amazing. And he, for me, is a very challenging interview. A lot of these people are pretty easy to interview. And I don't like to intimidate or bully, but I like to ask hard questions. But I gave up the stage 3 times, which you're never supposed to do as an interviewer. One was to Gary Keller. He just kind of took command. One was to Barbara Corcoran, who leaned over and said, "I met your wife." What'd she say? Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. And the other one was Barry Diller, who you don't ever take the mic away from him. So, and once they take the mic away, then there's no one intervening, and they can use your platform and your stage and your audience to say whatever they want. All 3 of them said brilliant stuff, so it didn't matter. But those are just 3 anecdotes that of the hundreds and hundreds of people I've interviewed where I felt like, uh-oh. Oh, another one was Kara Swisher. She took the mic away from me. She said I dressed like Barry Manilow. It was the first opening. I interviewed her many times, but she opened by saying, "Oh, you look like Barry Manilow." And then it became our shtick where every time she came, because I like to dress up, she would make some funny comment about how I was dressed. So there were 4 of them, I guess.
What's the angriest you've ever made a real estate executive or source in a story or an interview question? You don't have to name names, but do you have an anecdote of somebody getting real mad at you?
God, so many, Patrick. I've so many. I once was I was on the ed side. I really wasn't on the business side. I'm an entrepreneur, so I love the business side, but I always had someone selling. And but often the biz side will say to the editorial team, "Come with us. We're going to go talk to someone and they're criticizing Inman and la la la." And I walked in this meeting. It was a big franchise. Well, I'll just tell you, it was Coldwell Banker. And the executives are all there, and you could just tell they didn't really like me. And I am controversial. I make my own bed, right? If there's bugs in it, I'm the one that got them out of the woods. And so business side was saying, "We'd like to do this and this, and when we need to ask editorial," they asked editorial, and they said, "We need you to sign a piece of paper saying that, or publicly say, not sign a piece of paper, that you support the franchise business model." And it was about this awkward thing. Am I going to say yes? And I kind of, walked around it a little and said, "Well, la, la, la." And I said, "Well, I don't think I can. I'm not going to go out here tomorrow and publicly, I support the franchise business model." I don't think I ever had an opinion about it. I ate a lot of McDonald's, and that's a franchise business model. I never thought franchising was bad. It was just a weird question, but it was a very hostile moment, in that meeting where I don't know where they thought I didn't, or I think it was because I always supported the entrepreneurs, because we always said it's a big tent at Inman and everybody's welcome. And I think when you welcome, back in the day, if you welcome the innovators, you were presumably against the traditional business model. And I never woke up any day of my life against a traditional, I don't think it entered my mind. So that guy was really mad at me before I walked in there. And I think it proved his point, and that, I wasn't part of because there was the old way it was, and NAR kind of wrote the script here, is you had to sign up for the way things are, which is why the DOJ and the FTC and lawsuits, and that was the problem. You want to call it a cabal, you want to call it collusion, you want to call it cooperation, whatever you want to call it, a good name or a bad name. It was that very idea. This is locked and loaded. No one can touch it, and don't mess with us. And if you mess with us, we're going to boycott you. We're going to, I've been boycotted so many times, and every time we got a boycott publicly, our subscriptions increased, our readership increased, because it meant what we were covering that they didn't like, that they were boycotting us. So, you just have to defy your critics, and sometimes, Rapid fire. That wasn't very rapid fire. I'm apologizing.
I let you talk. I think you've earned it. In the last second here, plug the new venture. What's going on? Talk a little bit about Longevity Media. Why should people pay attention?
Well, I need to plug a bunch of them. Found New York, found LA. Check them out. I'm also involved in Climate Check, which is an enterprise that's giving, again, democratizing climate data, giving to the public. The third one is longevity. I have everything I could possibly want in my life. I have a beautiful wife. I have wonderful kids. I have 5 grandchildren. I have a few nickels in the bank. And my whole quest is, how do I live longer and evade the Grim Reaper? And in that process, I realized, wow, here's another industry. The elite, arrogant doctors, the PhDs on one end, and the charlatans and the crazies on the other end, promising the fountain of youth. And there's the Inman lane of anything I've ever done, credible journalism. So what did we start with? An event. We're doing it March 15th, 16th in Palm Beach. And I don't need to promote it anymore because it's one of those, as I tell the team, the stars are aligned, gang. We have almost 1,000 regs. We can only handle 1,000. We're 2 weeks out. It's going to be a home run. The public, just like real estate back in '96, they needed an independent voice from the NAR. And similarly here, the public is starved for independent, credible information. We got all the best and the brightest coming, like we always try to do. And so check with me on March 17th, because I have no clue how it's going to go and what people are going to ask. But that's my new venture. It's called Live Long Summit.
I have no doubt it's going to be a success. It sounds awesome.
You two are great together. I love how you look good. You're good interviewers. You're not intimidating, and you let me talk. Wow, I love that.
Thanks, Brad. Well, you were super interesting. It was a pleasure to have you on, and it was just so amazing to talk with you. I appreciate it.